Hi, everybody. Welcome to November Fireside Chats for Asian Wander Women. I'm here with Jovi and Lauren today from the Asian Travel Girls podcast, and we are discussing this month the experiences that they've had traveling in South America, and specifically as Asian women. And so these two women have lots and lots of experience traveling in this continent. So we are going to learn a lot today. But I'm going to first throw it over to them and have them introduce themselves. So, Lauren, if you'd like to start, let us know where you're from, where you're located, who you are. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren. I'm originally very ABC. I'm from California originally, like suburbs of LA. I'm currently located at Buenos Aires, Argentina. I actually just recently decided to move here. So I am a digital nomad. Actually spent a good amount of time in Taiwan. That's actually kind of, I think, where I got my I don't want to live in America feeling anymore. But yeah, so over the last few years, I've traveled pretty much across almost all the continents except for Antarctica, still on my list. But I did spend an extensive amount of time in South America, really fall in love with Latin American culture. And so that's what brings me here today. And Jovi will talk more about yourself. And also, Jovi, talk more about our podcast too, please.
Oh, definitely. Yep. So I'm originally from LA as well, also grew up in the suburbs there. After that, moved up to the Bay Area for college and work, and overall was just a big California girl. I've always loved traveling, and I felt like when we went remote post COVID, I realized that this was a time in my life to go out and explore. There's just like a time when you're like, all right, I felt a huge calling to go and experience different homes, in different countries to expand my bubble. So I definitely spent a few months in Taiwan, a few months in South America, hit on parts of Europe and India as well. And so I just really thought the pandemic kind of like showed all of us the unpredictability of life and how you just never know when you've got to lock in. And so whatever you really want to do in terms of like seeing things, trying new cultures, and meeting new people, honestly, just outside of your kind of like circle and community that you're really used to, that was the time. Uh, After that was kind of like for the past like 3 years or so, and now I'm actually back in LA. Funnily enough, is sometimes you just end up back where you came from. I love LA and always have, and something about LA still speaks to me as a big part of my home. Lauren and I actually have a podcast called The Asian Travel Girls where we talk about all of our travel experiences. So definitely follow along for our journeys there as well.
Amazing. So glad you're both here with us this month. So let's jump into first. What was the first country in South America you went to and why? I wonder how long ago this was. Was this even pre-pandemic?
I was going to say, Jovi, what year was your first country? We'll say whoever had the earliest year gets to start with that country.
All right, my first South American country was in 2018. What about you, Lauren?
Okay, so if we're gonna count before when I was with my ex, it would be earlier, and it was Peru. But I think if you count more towards like my first solo trip there, I think it's a bit different. So Jovi, I'll let you go first because I don't count the time of my ex.
That sounds good to me. All right, so my first trip to South America was also Peru, and I think it's funny how both of ours was like our first official South American country was Peru. And I think it's because this goes back to how I think South America doesn't have a lot of advertising when it comes to tourism. And so Peru, when we think of South America and what's like the most like quintessential kind of like country we think about like Peru, Machu Picchu, strong tourism activity there. And for me, I actually did a solo trip. It was my first solo trip ever in 2018. And it was a very like core desire because I loved these llamas that came to our campus in Berkeley every year during our final season. And there was this guy who owned these llamas, and he would tell me that, like I always felt like a really strong like connection to these llamas. They're just very spiritual, calm beings. And he had taken many trips to Cusco, and he was like, if you love these llamas a lot, you should see them in their natural habitat or see kind of like their original cultural origin in Peru. And he would not stop talking about Cusco and how beautiful it was and how you would go every year. Um, and so that was something that implanted in me like back in college. I knew like, oh, I should hit up Peru someday. And in 2018, I was in between jobs. I had just accepted an offer at another company and had 1 month. It was like kind of like my first like corporate break for a month. And I was like, man, like I want to go to Peru, but I think I'm gonna have trouble, honestly, convincing my friends to just hop over to South America. And we can talk and go into kind of like maybe the whys of how it was difficult a little bit later. But I then decided, why not just do it on my own? Like I was feeling so adventurous, and I was like, I started getting more and more excited as I like started booking the itinerary. Definitely a little bit of like fear too, like kind of like nervousness, I would say, when you plan your first solo trip. Like, am I going to be okay? Like, like what if I don't know, I should probably tell my friends where I am, a good amount of them, but they're so far. But honestly, the excitement extremely outweighed the hesitation, and it was one of the best experiences ever.
Were your parents really afraid for you to go?
I'm gonna be really honest, they didn't know. Like, just casually didn't mention it.
And their Asian parents, they probably would freak out, to be fair, like
No, they have for sure. I mean, I think this goes back to a lot like traveling South America as an Asian woman, right? Like, yes, even though I was like, probably like 24 at the time, but it's just not something. I think there would be a lot of reasonable concerns. Like I think even if like my own like future daughter someday were to tell me she's going to travel alone on her first trip to South America, even though I had done it before, I would still naturally be like, oh, like, are you sure? Like, you sure you don't want to bring a friend? Like, where you could be staying? Like, 100 questions later, and like, it's too much.
Yeah. But you know what? I was listening to your story, and I think it's really cool how people phrase things and how they like share their experience can really influence you, because this person was like, Cusco's amazing, you have to go, like Peru's amazing, you should check it out, versus somebody else who, I often find this is the case, people have like travel myths and stereotypes about certain places, and it's usually from when they haven't been before, but they've heard from other people or they've seen it online or whatever it is, but they don't actually have firsthand experience. And then they tell you, oh no, like Peru's really dangerous, you shouldn't go, like whatever, right? Like you hear these things about certain countries. And so it's amazing that this person was just an advocate for you to visit this place, and they were just like selling it. They were like, this is amazing, you have to go. And then you were like, yeah, that does sound amazing, I should go.
Yeah, and and that's so powerful too, because I think that we probably have all been travel advocates. Like I know I have, and it's just like with you and your trusted friends, it's like you kind of have an idea of when someone would really enjoy a place based on any knowledge that you have of them. And so that's something that I think gets you into maybe like kind of like the roads less traveled, right? Like maybe I wouldn't have ever thought about Peru if he didn't mention it that much. Like I maybe have gone somewhere else. Maybe I just would have gone to like, I don't know,
Europe.
Europe or something like that, which is exactly.
Yeah.
As most people do. Yeah. Um, yeah. So I guess I'll share. So I'm actually going to stick with Peru. Reason being, mine was later than yours, Joe. I remember the exact year now, 2019, and I actually kind of agree with you. I think Peru is an excellent first place to go. So when people ask me now, with like, so my own experience, I went was because I wanted to go like climb Machu Picchu, right? Peruvian food I heard was really good, and again, this is kind of like the reason people ask me even. I honestly feel like Peru is the Thailand of South America. And you know what I mean, right? When I say Thailand, it's like super touristy, everything's really set up for you, and it's like there's attractions that are just like naturally beautiful, right? And I honestly feel that's the way with Peru. Like you go to Cusco, honestly, Cusco is probably pretty safe actually. I actually don't know the exact numbers, statistics, right? But I would say Cusco is like relatively safe because it is such a tourist city and like made for tourists, and they don't want to f with that industry, even like the local gangs or whatever you want to call like those scary things. Like you do have to watch out for stuff like pickpockets, not like Taiwan. That's like my friends, I always say it's not Taiwan or Japan, like it's not that safe, y'all, but it's not like violent crime is happening every 2 minutes. And so I think like with Peru, it's pretty easy, like in terms of safety compared to other South American countries. There's a lot to see and do just in Cusco alone, and there's actually other places that people don't even think of. And I think flights are actually relatively cheap going from LA. So like compared to like I think people think of Brazil, Argentina, all these countries, they're so like far away, which they are actually. But Peru is actually rather accessible. So I agree, Joby. I think it's a good first country you went to. Very touristy friendly, lots of great nature, good food, which we can get into later, but not all South American food is good. So we'll talk about that more later. But like Peruvian food, I can definitely vouch for is actually quite delicious. So yeah, that's why I decided to go, and I apparently dragged my ex with me. So
I mean, you're both making a case for me. I've never been to Peru, so I'm like, okay, making a mental note. I will be visiting Peru. And I've also heard this about the food. I don't remember. I know I'm like, am I getting confused with another country? But is it the country of like many fusion dishes? Is that what Peru is? Yeah, okay. Someone
Yeah.
was, I remember meeting someone at a language exchange in Malaga in Spain. And it was like someone retired at this language exchange, but they had settled in Malaga and they were saying like, oh, like I visit Peru every year. I love Peru. You have to go for the food. It's like the best in the world, like top tier in the world, because you're gonna get, the best fusion. You're like,
I know.
Lauren,
Asian
like,
food is superiorly better than like Peru is up there, but Asian food is superiorly better. Sorry, like a good thing we're on an Asian Women Wander, like it's not like a more international one, but Asian food is still superior.
So like in Lima, it's funny because like Lima and Cusco just have very different gastronomic scenes. Like Lima is supposed to have like a bunch of like really, really like amazing restaurants that, are just known for not only like the ceviche, but just a bunch of like fusion food as well. And it's funny because like I only spent like a couple days in Lima really because I was so excited about Cusco. And then Cusco's where you go, you're just like off like the beaten path kind of like it's like very like mountainy, like high altitude, all of that stuff, like kind of more like scenic, um, natural Peru. And that's where you kind of come across like the less typical stuff, like the guinea pigs, the alpaca steaks. Like, it's just opposite gastronomy, but loved both. Definitely try.
Different regions, of course, just like, and we can say it's for any country, like different types of food are ate based on regions. So yeah.
so then after visiting Peru, was that immediate? Was that like an immediate spark of like, oh, I loved South America, I want to see more? Or did it take a while before you visited your second country?
Oh yeah, totally. Like for me, like I actually did Peru and Chile in the same trip. And so Chile afterwards. Oh, another bit, I think like wow, friends really do make a huge impact. I had gone to Chile after Peru because I had met a few friends at an entrepreneurship boot camp back in Berkeley, and we had stayed in touch over WhatsApp for like 2 years or so. And I was like, well, if I'm in Peru, I might as well stop by Chile and hang out with them. And it'd be nice to have like local tour guides. And that honestly was huge because I think it's so different between me going to explore Chile on my own versus just having locals take me around Santiago. One of my friends also had some family in like Vina, and it was just so much easier to navigate after like my solo period to be like to meet up with friends and be taken
Mhm.
around. And that was something that was a really fond memory for me, which is why I'm also now like an advocate being like, yeah, like Chile is great. And anytime someone goes to Chile, I'm like, you should hit up my friend. Like it's like a whole like system, right? But especially after that trip, I was very much big on South America. I was definitely like, I'm gonna come back again someday because I know just like when you look at a map, right, and you see so many countries that you just know nothing about. I'm sure we all like just kind of have this urge to be like, well, I want to have my own experience, like we've heard about maybe like the one or two things, stereotypes and like things to see that are associated with each specific country. But it's like you really just don't know until you go and experience it on your own because each one of us has a unique perspective on like what like brings us joy in a country.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I'm just curious, do you have a number? Do you know how many countries in South America you've been to now?
Oof. I think if I had to give a quick count, it's definitely around 7.
I was gonna say, how many are there total?
That was actually my second follow-up question.
I was like, the thing is, I know relative to South, like the way I describe it is different because it's like, yeah. But I think Joey, we're pretty close in number. I think I only went to one more than you, so I can just add one to yours, basically.
Nice.
Yeah. Whatever yours is what I was gonna say for mine, basically. Yeah. I was gonna say, like, I had a pretty different experience kind of coming back to South America because for me, I actually was so I went to Peru. Now I remember it was 2019. So obviously the year before COVID, right? You also like no one's in 2020 trying to go anywhere, right? And again, I think the mindset I had in 2019 was just so different of who I was. In 2019, I was with my ex, like then we had COVID. And I actually broke up my ex during COVID, by the way. So like, a lot of my life changed. So for me, I think what got me more into going to South America was I was already on this like train of wanting to travel. Right after I got back from Taiwan, I was working remotely in the U.S., but I got bored of the U.S. pretty quickly, to be honest. And I originally gone to Mexico for a trip, and I think we're just counting South America. So Mexico's still Latin America, obviously, right? But when I went to Mexico, I basically ended up meeting a lot of South Americans because logically that makes sense. It's close to South America, at least they speak the same language. And I ended up meeting a few Colombian people that were super cool. And they're like, you got to come visit. And, I think all of us can agree that until like very recently, none of us are like Colombia, go visit, right? Like in the last few years, it's been like kind of more of a destination, but 10 years ago, so no one's like, go visit Colombia. It's so great. And so luckily, and this is actually Jovi and I both went to the same thing. We got invited to a friend's birthday at Medellin. And so that's actually what kind of like sparked my interest. Like I already loved Mexico. I was open to go somewhere else and had to be US time zone still, right? So again, we only have so much of that part of the world, right? And I've been to Canada before, love Canada, Justine, but didn't want to go back to Canada again as my exotic trip. Okay, I'm gonna be honest here. I was like, Colombia's coming up. Why not? And I do think that from Colombia, that did really spark my love for the like wanting to explore the rest of South America. Like at that point, I met some Chileans. I really love Colombia itself. The people are so friendly and make you feel at home. That I like that Latin energy that I love so much, like really got me. And then I will definitely say then it was like Jovi shortly after that just did a whole South America trip. And that made me want to do the whole South America as well. But in terms of number of countries, whatever number Jovi has, but one more because I went to Paraguay. But I feel like when I say 7, it's not impressive. So I'm going to say the way that impresses people. I've been to every country in South America except for Venezuela for obvious reasons, y'all. Political unrest going on there. And there's like 3 tiny, tiny countries right above Brazil. Those are the 4 countries I've not been to. But otherwise, I'm pretty much done with all of South America. And I am trying to plan a trip to go to the 3 on top of Brazil. And I've talked to my Venezuelan friends about going to Venezuela. They're just like, you can go like the outskirts for now, but please don't go into our capital because you will get robbed. I'm like, okay, maybe not that one. But I think that at one point I will at least get through all of South America. I really love it in South America. And people, yeah. And again, I think the idea is dangerous, but there are safe places for sure. So
yeah. And that kind of segues us right into the next thing I wanted to ask, because I went to Chile in 2018 maybe. And I was also thinking, like, obviously a lot of places you visit, I always personally like to visit places where I know people. That's like a number 1 factor for where I might visit. And then number 2 is, word of mouth. Someone recommends a place and they've had a great experience, so they guide you that way. But I went to Chile with, I was a flight attendant at the time, so I went with another flight attendant because they had a work trip there, so I went with them. And then, so I wouldn't have gone, that was my first experience, and I wouldn't have gone if that wasn't for them. And then I went to Brazil in 2023, I want to say. And also I went to Brazil because my mom was on a work trip. So I was just like following people each time. But both places that I wouldn't have visited on my own. But I remember this most recent time going to Brazil, a lot of people, even after I arrived, a lot of like foreigners and tourists that I met were like, you need to be so careful. You need to be so careful here. You're going to get pickpocketed. Like you need to be very, very careful. Don't like accidentally walk into a favela. Like you need to be very careful. And everyone was just like freaking me out a little bit. And they were like, don't do this, don't do that, blah, blah, blah. I remember when I got off the airplane and I was taking the taxi to the hotel, I was taking a video with my phone and the window in my taxi was open in the back. So I was taking a video and he was like yelling at me in Portuguese, and I don't speak any Spanish or Portuguese. And he was like, don't do that. I was like, oh my God. I was like, did I just take a picture of something like sacred or something I'm just not allowed to take pictures of? But I later figured out he was saying like, do not stick your phone out the window so close to the window because someone's going to like breeze by on a motorbike and just grab your phone out of the window. So you need to be very careful. And I was like, oh my, okay, this is not what I was expecting, right? So I would say right off the bat, people, I get like, it was out of the goodness of their heart, obviously. It was like well-intentioned to keep me safe, but they freaked me out. They 100% freaked me out right away. But then when I got to explore and walk around on my own, I was like, oh, it's fine. Like, obviously be aware of your surroundings, but it's actually okay here, right? And so it's quite interesting, like the way that people, I guess, the different perspectives people have and the way that they want to protect you and keep you safe. But it can really freak you out. So I'm curious about what stereotypes or fears that you had heard or you had been, I don't know, bombarded with maybe before you went, or that you had researched, and if you had any, and then if those stereotypes were maybe like demystified after you got there.
I do have a story on Brazil now that you mention it, Justine. It's And so Brazil was probably one of the countries where, I mean, just even when you like are searching online what neighborhoods to stay in each part of Brazil, because I spent like around like 3 months in Brazil. And so I did a whole like coastal, like, Amazon, Rio, Sao Paulo, but then I also went on like a coastal kind of like route as well. So I honestly love Brazil. Brazil's one of my top three favorite South American countries. I need to go
Mhm.
back. I love everything about it. But I did keep seeing how, like, wow, there's a lot of emphasis on safety in Brazil, right? Because of the favelas, because of just like the history. And I was like, okay, I'll try really hard to stay in like neighborhoods that are recommended. And however, I do remember out of all my South American travels, I had no issues except in Brazil. There was this one time when I was walking in the city center of, I think it was either Sao Paulo or Rio, but I immediately, as soon as I got off, as soon as like I got dropped off, and I wasn't alone, by the way. It was broad daylight. I was actually with like a travel partner, and I felt eyes on me. You know, when you can feel eyes, like it's like you feel like something shifted a little bit. And I'm like, okay, well, you know what? Like I felt this before. I mean, I've spent a lot of time, you know, in San Francisco, let's say, where I felt that type of like shift as well. And I was like, well, it's fine because it's broad daylight. And so I'm like walking in like a normal, like crowded path. And all of a sudden, this guy on a bike, he's biking this way and I'm walking. And all of a sudden he gets really close and reaches out and snatches my necklace, just like yanks it off. And I was like shocked. I was like, whoa, that was like the first time anyone's really ever tried to like just yank something off me like that. I've got my phone stolen in like, Berkeley before, but I think like the necklace thing really scared me because I'm like, what if it didn't like snap off? Like I don't know, it's just wild. And so that's when I learned you do not wear jewelry. That was my mistake as well too. But I think my lesson from that is like, if you're feeling an energy shift, if you're feeling something's off, definitely try and get out of it, or just kind of trust your instincts basically.
Mhm.
But honestly, after that, that was the only incident I ever had. It did not deter me from wanting to go back to Brazil. It was just more so, hey, there are definitely some areas, unfortunately, some figures who um really don't care and like will steal from people who are obviously tourists. So that was my Brazil story. I think another stereotyped country is probably Colombia, right? I think when you say Colombia, people are like, oh, there's a lot of, narco trafficking happening there. And yes, that is definitely something that, the country deals with and like is continuing to confront today. But honestly, like in the main city centers, Medellin, Cartagena, um, it's I had no issues there. I feel like I've kind of Laura and I have probably come back as like Colombia advocates where we're like,
Yeah.
keep your wits about you. But honestly, the scenery is unparalleled. The city is actually doing a lot to like make it a safe place and kind of like encourage more of that tourism. People there are super friendly. I think you almost have to keep in mind that like every city, no matter where you are, like, it could be the US, it could be Europe, like every city has their own thing. And so it's kind of like that. It's more like I think Colombia just has more of like a media kind of history behind it too with all the TV shows.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say, like, I think the biggest stereotype we all know about South America is goes back to like not being safe, right? And the thing is, like, truthfully, there are actually a lot of places in South America that are not safe. I'm gonna actually say that's not a wrong stereotype. And with that in mind, also keep in mind that there's also a lot of places like there's a lot of places that need tourism in South America, you know? And I think one thing, if anything, I don't know if this is more reassuring or less reassuring, but typically the touristy places are actually pretty safe because the gangsters don't want to mess with the tourism money. They know it brings money into local people and makes the people happy, and the governments won't like shut them down if as long as it doesn't like bring in a stream of income for normal people, right? Again, not maybe not the best thing like to say, but at the same time, I was like, I think for me, when I think about South America, most of the places you go, like it's pretty easy to Google to see like if it's safe. You know, like again, just Google where in Colombia to visit. I promise you, the places that are dangerous are not going to show up. You know, and with that, it does come down to like basic, in my opinion, basic common sense, right? Like don't walk alone at night. You know, don't wear flashing jewelry, right? Like be aware, like Joey's saying, like the energy. So I do think a lot of it does go to that. And like again, when people say they're scared of getting like, oh, like it's dangerous, I'm gonna be honest, even my Brazilian friends, where they're, and my Brazilian friends, by the way, are the ones who are most like, it's how dangerous, Lauren. And I'm like, okay, and like how? And honestly, a lot of it comes down to things getting robbed. Honestly, your cell phone getting robbed is like the biggest thing. And I actually got my cell phone robbed in Buenos Aires, but it was like the most like the guy just took it and ran, you know? So again, it's like, was it violent? No. And to be honest, other things like people don't realize, but Europe can have the same thing, right? Like I think Barcelona is one of the most like pickpocketed. Like my diving instructor got her phone pickpocketed in Paris, right? And yet we still consider Europe places to go. So again, I would say like, yes, it's not completely safe. Again, let's not compare to Taiwan or Japan where you can leave your phone to save your seat, right? But relatively speaking, if you're in the main cities, it's safe enough, right? Be aware, like have all of your wits. I was gonna say though, at the same time, I've also heard some like kind of like crazy stories. I personally never expected, I've never like experienced violent crime, but Joey and I had like a friend of ours who did take an overnight bus. This is after Adam's birthday. He took an overnight bus and then their bus got like robbed gunpoint, you know? Again, no one got hurt. It was just give me your cell phone. Right. And then I also heard like, this is like when I was traveling, I met like a guy who told me he met these people who were in Medellin and they're actually in like the good part of Medellin, but they're walking as a group at night. And apparently some guys with guns came by and go like, give me your cell phone. But again, if you hear the note of what I'm saying, just really like watch out your cell phone, everyone. And actually like a lot of my friends who like are, I have a really good friend of mine who's French and she lives in Brazil. She literally just brings two phones. She's like, I have my dummy phone and I have my real phone. And that's actually a very common practice here. Like if you have another phone, because then you give that away. But again, I would say most times than not, it's not as violent. Again, don't be walking to the favelas, you know, but like if you're generally in the safe areas and like the places that are really popular and touristy, you're overall generally fine. Just be self-aware, maybe be more cautious with your cell phone. That's kind of my takeaway with it. So
yeah, I think those are great tips, and I think that's true of really, like you said, like Europe is also there are hot spots in Europe where it's known that there are pickpocketers too, and yeah, we have a totally different viewpoint on it as a society, right? We look at Europe in a very different way than we look at South America. And so, with that in mind, like, what kept you going back? Like, what makes you keep wanting to revisit? Like, okay, so one thing as Asian women and like Asians in general, we love our food. And you already touched on this, Lauren. You're like, not everywhere in South America is the food good. So I travel for food personally. I mean, it's not the only thing, but it's a big part of traveling for me. And so what keeps you going back if it's not the food?
Justine, for me, like you hit it right on the nail. For me, it's still food. Like it's
yeah, food is still a big part.
yeah. It's like I think in South America, it's kind of like each country has their specific type of food that they're really good at, or some like niche type of like soup, or like, just interesting type of dish. Or like, for example, like Bolivia's potatoes, unparalleled. You know what I mean? And it's the high altitude. It's like simple things like that where it's like you're not gonna find any better potatoes than in Bolivia. um and so it's like you kind of just go into it being like, all right, maybe I won't be eating a whole sushi buffet or a night market, but we're going to be finding some really interesting soups and things like that I'll never be able to find anywhere else again. Like I'll come back to the US and I will not be able to find a Bolivian restaurant that cooks it like the Cholita does in over there. So that's I feel like still top one for me is like I love just like exploring that cuisine, even if it's like maybe I'm just eating like, a very basic thing, but still so, so, so good. I think secondly is like the scenery, the nature, the hiking. It's really, really just a nature paradise. Like I think like some of my best like horseback riding tours, hikes that I've done, just even just like Ushuaia, like in Argentina, like kind of like seeing the glaciers down there and seeing like the flora and fauna. The Amazon rainforest is like really truly lives. I remember reading, I've always read about the Amazon. We've all read about it, like, like when we're growing up, like, oh, the Amazon has like the greatest micro biodiversity in the world. And the words, it's interesting, but it doesn't actually compare it. But it's something that we all know, like, oh, the Amazon, that's like the biggest, like, massive land that contains like all these different types of like fruits and animals. And then when you go, you're like, wow, like it's kind of like that feeling of like there's so much beyond yourself, right? And it's like that feeling of like, let's stay curious. And I love that feeling. And I think I get it the most from South America, because it's sometimes, it's not always the most like predictable, comfortable type of thing I'm expecting. But that's exactly what I went for, right? Is for the adventure. I wanted to go and stay in some cabin. I wanted to go and sleep for one night in the hammock. And those are some of my fondest memories to this day.
That's so nice. And for you, Lauren?
Yeah, I have a little bit less appreciation of the variety of foods than Jovi here. Like okay, there are some countries here that have really good food. Like there's a reason I'm Argentina. They have like really good steak, and they have really good pasta. So, but I'm just gonna be completely honest. That's not my number one reason to come back to South America. Like maybe Peru, I want to say Peru food is that good, but like Peruvian food's that good. But like for me, I think two things, and I'll align with Jovi first, right? Nature is definitely a big one. I mean, actually, I think I kind of forgot to mention this. Like one of the reasons I also decided to continue traveling South America was I wanted to climb, I wanted to hike Patagonia. So you're talking about like some of the coolest mountains in the world. Brazil again, like has the Amazon, right? I do think that the nature in South America is really cool. And to be fair, we can also argue there's a lot in Asia, right? I think the big difference here, it feels less touristy here. That's a really big difference I felt every time I came to nature here, especially Brazil. I feel like every time I went to any beautiful nature place, it felt like actually more local. And even if you weren't meeting locals, you're meeting other South Americans. And I think that's something really cool because when I traveled Asia and did nature places, I felt like most of the nature places were like just for tourists. And that's something that for some reason didn't ever sit well with me when I'm traveling Asia. Like I love Asia, especially for the food. I'll definitely go to Asia for the food, y'all. Right. But like when it comes to nature, I felt like in South America, I felt more in tune. And I do think there's an overall more like connection a lot of locals feel with their nature. Like, there's a lot of them are indigenous mixed or something. So they feel this kind of protection for their local nature. And I think that shows, like, I mean, Bolivia, especially, right, Joby, they actually were like calling it Mother Earth and everything. And so I think the nature here is definitely something I really love. But I was going to say for me personally, it is definitely the people. We're probably gonna dive into this a lot in a bit, just the culture, but I really love the people in South America. I mean, let's be real, every country's different, and there's like almost like these nuances that you kind of make fun of, especially if you're South American, Latin American, you're like, oh yeah, but they're arrogant, they're this, oh, they're just so loud and party too much, right? But I would say there's overall this general feeling, and for me at least, for Latin Americans, they're very warm people. They've always made me feel really welcome. And I was gonna say, I think the best choice I made was after going to Peru with my ex and do my first solo trip was Colombia, because in Colombia, it was one of the first countries where I was able to make local friends to almost no effort. I was traveling alone. I went to Tirona, which is like this really beautiful national park near near the ocean and stuff. And I just was at the hostel by myself, and people were just super friendly with me, made me feel included. They're just like, just dance with us, party with us, and for me, that's something that I couldn't find anywhere else. I think there is some, like, I heard like culture like that in Africa as well, but haven't done a lot of Africa traveling, to be fair. But I will say in Latin America, just being able to like connect with people, even though I didn't speak their language, right? Like that was something that really struck out to me. And so for me, I always come back to South America for the community. Like I literally came moving to Buenos Aires because I'm like, I have such great Brazilian friends. I love Brazilians the most, by the way. Like they're just my favorite people. They're just super warm. And I was considering Brazil, but the reason I'm choosing Buenos Aires is just a safer city, but like talks of safety, right? And there's a lot of Brazilians here. And I literally came back to hang out with them and be with them. They've made me feel so welcome. Like I've only been back for 2 weeks, not even, and I felt like I'm home. Like one of my friends invited me to so many things, to like go to fora dancing. Then she invited me to like a festival for like, food just this weekend. And today we went to lunch and walked around like Chinatown here. And it was just like these small 3 little events, and yet I feel really at home. And I think for me, that's why I always choose to come back to South America personally. So
I think this is actually something we can talk about as well, which is it's a good stereotype of South America that people don't often think about, which is, yeah, we think about, it's quote unquote unsafe, but we also hear that the people are extremely warm, extremely welcoming, that Latin American countries are just like, they
Party.
bring you in like family, right? So I think that's a really amazing thing about this culture as well that we don't emphasize enough, right? We're focused, we have that natural negativity bias as humans. And so it's great to also remember that, for me at least, when I travel, it's always about the people. And so the people make all the difference in the experiences. And so if you have amazing people around you, you're going to have a great time. So that's really amazing that it's the people that keep you coming back as well, and the food for Jovi.
Apparently, I don't line with Jovi in that one. Yeah, food, nature, and then apparently food for Jovi, nature, and people.
Yeah. And then if we transition a little bit and focus a little bit more on specifically what it's like to travel in these areas as an Asian woman, I would be interested to hear your perspective on if, yeah, if that makes a difference at all. Because I know for me when I travel certain places that maybe don't have a huge Asian population, you get the normal like, oh, ni hao, like from everybody, or like just like the normal, I don't even need to get into it. Everyone listening knows as well, so I don't even need to get into it, but curious what it's like in South America for you.
I wish I got some ni haos because that would be the correct language. I actually get a lot of konnichiwas.
Konnichiwa is really popular too.
I
Yeah.
like I for some reason I keep getting more konnichiwas and annyeongs or annyeonghaseos than like the ni haos. Uh, but I think it's like funny, right? It's kind of like I think the first thing is more so you're definitely gonna feel like you stand out. Um and not in exactly like a bad way, just more so you'll look around, you'll be like, it's part of why I think I love South American travel too, is just to go somewhere completely different. Like I want it to be in a place where no one really looked like me, or it'd be even more fascinating if I did happen upon like the kind of like the chief of food in Peru and seeing like the Chinatowns in Argentina and Peru and being like, wow, like Asians really do kind of have a little hub everywhere. And it's fun to see that Chinese food there. And even, yeah, I would definitely indulge in like Chinese food every once in a while just to be like, I wonder what, this restaurant that's probably been here for like 20 years, what that tastes like, right? And how authentic it can be and how impacted it's been by like where it's at. Um you'll get like some stares. You'll definitely get a lot of questions about where you're from. And I think most of it is definitely like just pure curiosity and good intention, right? Um, I think like it's kind of like I think like when you're traveling, you're kind of like in this like your own POV, right? You kind of go through and you're not really looking at yourself and what you look like. And you don't really kind of think about that until other people start asking you. And then you're like, oh, that's right. Like I'm like, I do look a little different, right? Something that's also endearing is like I remember there are definitely a few times in Colombia where people would like ask to like take pictures with me. And I thought that was really funny too. So it's just like, I don't know. It's like nothing I would say dangerous. It's just kind of like the awareness that like you look very different and they don't see a lot of you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was gonna say like, okay, so I have been to some parts where like, yeah, I got the ni hao or whatever. Actually, a lot more in Mexico of all places. I don't know, Joe, if you ever got that. I got them more in like Central America and Mexico for some reason. I would say generally, like again, let's just remember there's assholes everywhere, guys. I hope I can say asshole on this on podcast too, by the way. But like there's assholes everywhere, right? And you are occasionally gonna get the person who's a little bit more racist and stuff, right? But I would say generally speaking, people are quite warm and kind about it. Again, they're really curious. I think Joey, you put a really good word. Like they really don't know a lot, you know. I think and especially the recent years, I think has been interesting because now you have a lot of people into K-pop. I'm not even kidding you how that probably changed a lot of people's views on Asians. Like now they're more excited, and I would definitely say a little fetishizing. Like I've been on a few dates where these girls are like, "So do you like K-pop?" And I'm like, "I'm not Korean." They're like, "You don't like your music?" I'm like, "I'm not Korean." Like, girl, like, and not Asian girls like K-pop. They're gonna give you this like a little bit news drop here, you know. But like, so I think that first of all, the representation of Asians have helped. Okay, I think it's made people more curious. Now, curiosity doesn't mean that they're super knowledgeable, and there's definitely an ignorance level there, right? But I will say, like what Joby was saying, I think it's all really well intentioned. More so than not, they're just curious why you're here. They know it's far. Like again, if they think you're from China, they know it's far, right? Even if you're from America, they're still kind of fascinated because, like, oh, but like, are you very Chinese? They don't really know. They still, it's like something different. I do get a lot of my friends asking, "Can you speak something in Chinese?" I don't. Again, it's more times than not, it's just out of place. Like they're curious. They don't have that experience personally. Um, but still, I do think that overall, personally for me, like it's, yeah, you do stand out. But I would say that also, hopefully it's okay for me to say, is Asian women have never been a bad thing, really. We've always been like just known as beautiful, wonderful moms and like getting our jobs done right. I mean, like the stereotype is that they were still pretty in other countries. I don't know. That's what I've gotten noticed in the end days, that we're quite desired no matter where we go. So it's not bad. So I do think, though, on that note, I know it's more women focused. I think it's a little bit harder for Asian man. There is a little bit more stereotypes and a little bit more like kind of making fun of. But for Asian women, generally speaking, it's been all right. Again, you might meet the one or two assholes who try to make you uncomfortable, but I think those assholes exist everywhere in the end of the day. But otherwise, especially if you show an interest in like their culture, if you're sharing their culture, and like, so Joby and I are a little bit, I don't want to say biased, but a little bit lucky, or I guess in the sense is that we both speak Spanish. That helps a lot, to be honest. They like always appreciate people like, you speak Spanish, you can speak a little bit, or even my attempts at bad Portuguese, they really appreciate that. But again, they are curious at the end of the day. So, but I think just, like again, like kind of like common sense, like if you want to meet people, they're gonna be friendly. If not, and there's some assholes, just ignore it, keep going. You'll be fine. So
Yeah, and I think this is good perspective to remember because I think when I was younger, I used to get really riled up when I would travel and someone would say ni hao to me or something. I would just be like, I can't believe you're like so racist, whatever, whatever. But it really is majority of the time, it is just ignorance in like the nicest meaning of that word, right? It's just like they really don't know better. They don't know about the culture, they don't know about us, and it's just curiosity. It really is. It just boils down to that. And so there's no need to get so worked up about it. It's just that is their olive branch actually to you to say like, hey, this is how I connect with you. This is what I know about Asian culture, and this is me trying to connect with you. So I think it's good to remember that.
I just quickly add. So I actually like did some like research. So over here we're all American, including Canada here, Justine, right? But I assume like a lot of people in Asian women, Wonder Woman are also like ABCs of some sort, right? Like again, westernized a little bit, right? I've actually also learned that a lot of times when we're offended, actually more ABCs get offended. Like actual Asians from Asia, they actually don't get as offended when you like, oh, they actually kind of, again, they find it like, oh, flattering that you're trying to get to know their culture. But I think there is, like, to your point, Justine, there is almost like a little bit of a, I think it's because we own ourselves have had identity crisis. We might even have our own experience of a little bit of like ignorant racism growing up, that we're actually more sensitive. That's something I'll point out. But again, in the end of the day, most people I met, it's just like very harmless ignorance. They don't know. And I try to remind myself that and be patient. Again, the one or two assholes are like, I'm going to do it to make him comfortable. Or like, oh, you're cheating. Oh. But more times than not, they just don't know any better. So that's
Yeah.
what I remind myself. So
Lauren, I think you've got to a good point there. And I think that research, like, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? I think a lot of us are just kind of a little bit triggered from like the squinty eye thing, the like, oh, I'm just gonna like say random phrases in Chinese or like whatever language. That definitely just stems from like childhood growing up in a non-Asian country. And I just had another thought too, like, to be fair, I sometimes will have trouble telling Europeans apart. And it's because I have not looked at like a vast amount of Europeans all the time. So honestly, if someone were to look at me and like give me a konnichiwa, I can't be offended. It's hard. It's hard, guys. It's
Yeah.
we even get it wrong between each other, right? It's like if someone goes like, "Can you tell?" I'm like, honestly, I don't know, but they might be ABC. Most likely ABCs are like, I can tell you they're either ABCs or not ABCs. That's the only distinguish marker I can really tell. Is like I can just tell by the clothes style on that. But actual Asian, I don't know. Could be like, unless it's obviously distinct. There are some more distinct features, right? But more times than not, if you're talking about East Asian, like Chinese, Korean, Japanese, I'm like, even Vietnamese, throw that in there, right? I don't know sometimes, to be very terse. So yeah,
And,
they have a, like, so
and that's fair. Yeah. Like at the end of the day, when we're making these guesses, we're all just making assumptions, right? We're all just making assumptions and never good to assume. So,
exactly.
so I actually thought about you were saying how you both speak Spanish. Did you start learning Spanish before? after, during, and obviously this is like you said, it's very helpful to travel South America with it. So beyond just learning Spanish, what other tips and tricks can you also share? But yeah, curious first about when you started learning Spanish.
So I started learning Spanish in high school, and it was something that I will admit started out as like a foreign language requirement the first year, and it grew into a kind of like lifelong love for it. It quickly became my favorite like class in high school. And I think it's just because I found the language to be very, very beautiful. I loved like the music. My teachers were all like very enthusiastic. And overall I just had a lot of fun. Like I think like learning how to say different things and in like this new language that like I feel like I had some Mandarin background before, but I actually really kind of I think it set me on like my love for foreign languages and realizing that like, oh, I really do want to go to a bunch of these different countries someday. And in order to do that, it's much easier if you do speak the language. So I learned Spanish in high school for like 4 years and I really didn't want to lose it. So I made sure to kind of like, I think after my first trip to Mexico, it was like this quick like cruise to Mexico. And it was like the first time I ever had to like use my Spanish like in real practice, and it was to negotiate like the price of a bracelet, and I was like, this is powerful. This is like I feel like I've like unlocked something, right? um and so I knew that if I didn't keep practicing it, I'd be really likely to forget. So that's also another reason why I wanted to go to a Latin country in 2018, was because I felt that I then started learning Chinese in like college to like learn how to read and write. So it had been several years since I had been to a Latin speaking country. So I kind of wanted to like make sure I like at least every year, every other year to go to a Latin speaking country because it's so useful. I mean, literally, if you know Spanish, it applies to all of Spain and then all of South America. And it's a huge language. Even in LA,
And
it's
parts
like
of
super
Los
useful as
Angeles.
well in some neighborhoods.
I was like,
What was that, Lauren?
Parts of Los
Oh, parts
Angeles
of
and
Los Angeles, exactly. No, for real. So other tips besides doing some basic, even just basic Duolingo Spanish will take you a long way. But other tips would just be if you're if you don't feel like going solo, bring a friend. Make some local friends. Just like Lauren said, people are super friendly, and I think people would be super excited to show you around or at least point out some of like the top things to do. Doing research in these countries is also like a huge plus, and it'll take you a long way just to make sure you're like in the area that's convenient to everything, but also not on the edge of anything like super dangerous. um, and I would say overall, just be vigilant, practice normal vigilance as normal. But I think the language is probably one of the biggest things, is like doing a little bit of research before you go can just really give you an idea into like what you're about to embark on. Like when you do too much research, it kind of like spoils the destination. But I would say just like there are different nuances between like culture in Brazil versus culture in Peru. And I think just having a little bit of that context goes a long way.
I would say, so for my Spanish, by the way, no, I was so crap in Spanish before, and now like I've been learning pretty extensively for a while. To be fair, it's mostly for dating, but at the same time, I'm like living here, so you know. But yeah, I learned it pretty much because of traveling. I was like really inspired by it. I really wanted to. I met so many people in South America that didn't even speak really good English, but were making attempts to have me join, right? And I was like, I want to be able to speak to these people. Like, you know, like again, we make gestures, we like use translator, right? But to be able to really connect with them, like being able to speak Spanish has of course changed it. And like it's been great. I love being able to understand people at that level. So I definitely learned on the way. I'm still getting there, but I'm getting close to being pretty like just like you don't have to think, Lauren, just function, you know, which is very excited for just functioning at this point. But I would say I would, yeah, same as Jovi, like definitely do some research. It helps, right? Like know areas, get to know people. I was gonna say like I feel like something I've noticed when it comes to most Asian women, not always, but is that we like to tend to travel a bit fancier, right? A little bit nicer. We like, you know, try to say like these only experience the nice things. I would say for South America, try to go to those local bars, right? Try to go to like you don't have to stay at a hostel, but go to a hostel party because you'll meet some really cool like I have some friends who like literally just work at the hostel. That's how I met them, you know. And again, you don't have to stay at a hostel, but the thing is, a lot of these other Latin American people who are traveling are staying at hostels, and that's where I met a lot of my friends. Like I was saying there, and to be honest, that's where like why are you here? Like everyone here is a Latin American person. What are you traveling here? And I explain and I tell them how much I love it, use my broken Spanish, and they'd be like, oh, like come hang out with us, you know? So I think like really making efforts to meet people and like connect with that, like do that is like really a big way to connect. And then I mean, really enjoy the parties. There's so much good parties in South America, like so much cool things to do. So definitely do that. As I was saying earlier, if you're really scared of getting your phone stolen, bring a second phone. I think that's something to just do, like have an extra, like older iPhone to give away or whatever. And this one is, again, back to what I've been referencing before. Bring shin, like ramen with you. I bring around 3 to 4 every time I travel to South America because it's called my emergency noodle pack when I just need a little bit of spice and flavor in my life and I just need a bowl of noodles that's good. And I wouldn't say every country is like that. Like actually Sao Paulo and even Buenos Aires has some really good Asian food, right? Like, or at least acceptable. But some other countries, man, it's just like there's no hope of finding good noodles. So you got to bring that with you guys. So if you're like me and need noodles like every 2 weeks before you die, bring some good shin. It's just like you can always find hot water, you can find eggs, you can find vegetables, and it'll just hit the spot in the heart. So that's my tips.
I love that. I love that, Lauren.
That is a good tip.
My emergency instant noodles, right? Like I bought them in Colombia, and it's like I don't regret that because I needed that in Colombia. So
fair, totally fair. You're not finding shin in a lot of the mercados, that's for sure.
Harder to find, not impossible, just harder.
Harder. Lauren has found them apparently.
A lifelong goal of mine is to learn Spanish because I know how valuable it is. Like you were saying, Jovi, it just like opened up a door for you. You felt like it was powerful when you were able to use it. And I know that there is such a big population of the world that I could communicate with if I learned it. And so it is a lifelong goal of mine. While I was living in Taiwan last year, I had a friend she's ethnically Taiwanese, but then she grew up in Argentina. And so she speaks Spanish fluently. And so she was teaching us Spanish, but in Chinese. So I was learning it like you know what I mean? Like I wasn't learning Spanish with English as my descriptor. I was using Chinese to learn it. And my mind was like, oh no, I can't do this right now.
Honestly, Chinese and Spanish is probably what I was explaining this. It's really hard because the conjugation and they have so much grammar rules. And as we know, Chinese has almost no grammar rules. So it's actually really difficult to go from Chinese to Spanish. You have to speak it at birth, in my opinion, basically.
Also, the gender, like the gender of the nouns, like Chinese doesn't really have. I mean, they have a little bit with like the tas, but you know,
yeah,
they're usually non.
Yeah. Justine, you can do what I do. Sorry, just you can do what I do. Find someone to fall in love with. Like Latin people are so good looking and they're so passionate. Like they are great romantic partners. I mean, like interests at least. Sorry, the great romantic interests at the very least. Like find a good romantic interest with Latin. You will learn Spanish so fast. You have no idea. It was magical.
Lauren is a living proof of this. I have witnessed her transformation from very basic Duolingo Spanish to now just like, yeah, she can breeze through whole paragraphs and it's real, guys.
The thing about Duolingo that's funny is I remember trying to learn Spanish through it, and I've always been really mad because the first sentence they teach you is "Yo como manzanas," and I'm like, when is the last time you said that?
The problem with Duolingo, honestly, again, is that Duolingo doesn't teach grammar well. And grammar is really hard in Spanish. It's pretty difficult, even as English speakers, because we don't have conjugation. But I will say ChatGPT has been one of my best friends and therapists combined. So, and language teacher, apparently. So, highly recommend that.
Let's all be Duolingo buddies. I think all of us are learning a language right now. Like Lauren, you're maybe probably still doing Spanish. I'm doing Portuguese. And Justine, we are here to help you on your streak.
Yeah, we can help you again. I can help you find a partner. Like that'd be really easy. There's so many good looking people here. So you'll be so motivated.
Well, I will keep that in mind. Thank you. Okay.
Start now, Lauren.
So ready.
We've got just like a few more minutes here, and we've got like 2 more questions on our roster here. Let's see. Why do you think this region of the world is not as heavily traveled as Europe or Asia? And actually, before you answer, this kind of ties into the previous question for me. I was thinking about when I traveled Europe, it's actually really easy to travel because they have the infrastructure set up. So the way geographically Europe is set up is actually kind of similar to South America in the sense that like there's many countries all touching each other, and you would think because they're all in one landmass, it's quite easy to get around. But I'm curious if that is the case because in Europe you can like travel, planes are very cheap, trains are accessible, buses, you can even take a service called BlaBlaCar where you carpool with other people who are traveling from one city to another. So Europe is, I find, very easy to travel. And then I tried to start traveling Asia. My trip got stopped for, as you guys know, I'm starting to live here in Beijing now. So I was going to start traveling more of Asia, but then I realized it's all planes. I have to fly everywhere here, right? So I have to pre-book everything in advance. So it made things a little bit more difficult. But then I'm curious in South America if it's, I mean, because of the landmass, is it as easy as Europe or no?
I would say definitely not as easy as Europe. I think there's like a couple things. There's language barrier and in some countries not too much infrastructure, and those are really tied together where it's like language makes things a lot easier when you're navigating how do I go to the local bus station and buy tickets to go from this city to that city. Um and in terms of like infrastructure, of course like the spots like Peru and Colombia are pretty like, and the Amazon specifically, that area, maybe like, Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia are very well versed in being like, oh, we know you want to go see these three things. And like we have a bunch of tours that you can pick from, and then you're overwhelmed with the number of tours you can pick from. But if you want to do anything more niche, like, you want to go and see this like random national park, or you want to go to this like out of like this random city in Brazil, or like a coastal island that's kind of like the Hawaii of Brazil, or you want to go on a sand dunes tour, it's just all in Portuguese. Like I was on tours, I booked tours where it was just completely in Portuguese. And I was like, I was learning Portuguese at the time, and it's the best way to learn, but also
What a
it's kind of
function.
like rough if you're uncomfortable with like not knowing where you're going at all times. And a lot of things are done via WhatsApp. Like you realize that like not everything, like the same tour on like TripAdvisor will be like 5x the price of like a local like website in Brazil. So you got to do your research. You got to fill out all the forms in Portuguese. At least the website browsers though now have translators. And I think ChatGPT is going to be huge in transforming the way you travel. There's a lot of really cool AI tools coming out right now, by the way. Like Mind Trip's a really nice one too that kind of uses Chat GPT. And I think we're gonna see a new wave of like tools coming out that will help you with that. But I think it's kind of that. It's like you knowing the ins and outs. And so a big feedback when I get around people asking me how to start travel is more like, oh, I don't know where to start. Like, what would you recommend? And so I think that's the thing. It's like being travel advocates and being like, oh, this is what I've done before. Honestly, not as big of a hurdle when you know someone who's done it before and can give you almost like a not pre-planned itinerary, but a guide to
Mhm.
kick off and start off with.
I was gonna say, I feel like Jovi, you and I actually done that. We pretty much are the go-to people for South America. So we've given multiple, like we both given advice to friends about it. I was gonna say, I think the few reasons I think people don't travel South America, right? They think it's dangerous, right? They automatically think, oh my God, it's just dangerous. Um, and I would say on that note, dangerous. Again, back to Asian women. I think overall, a lot of people go for nice things. Like not all Asian women, like I'm someone who's not the stereotype of that, But I think a lot of Asian women go for nice things, and that is something that I would say I don't think has as much luxury options as like I don't know, like Joey. We don't really like, even you, and you like nicer things than me, but we haven't had like a like you never really posted like luxury, right? We did some really cool nature stuff, but I do think that's something that's not as there. So people go like, but I'm going to like have a nice trip. But even then, I think Medellin's getting pretty like people like to rent houses there. So there's still options. I guess they are less than Asia and less than Europe. So I would say that's probably another reason I see people doing that. But again, that's not why I go to Latin America. You go to Latin America for like different reasons, like for the culture, for like the nature, and just the people are. And you can't buy that shit. Pardon my French, but you can't buy that. I think language is a barrier too. Like as Joby is saying, like I mean, people are nice generally, but it is like when you're like stressed and you're trying to get from point A to point B, and like you're like, well, no one understands my language. It's like obviously that's hard, and their English is significantly worse than Europe. Europe has more money and infrastructure into that in the end of the day. In terms of getting around, I would say it's not that bad actually. The thing is, the thing in South America is everything's connected by bus. It's actually rather convenient if like to like if you're comfortable using buses. And the thing is, their buses are actually super comfortable. Their buses are like pretty nice. You can sleep on them. They're not like not like our Greyhound buses, right? They're actually like pretty nice. Like they're like airport kind of seats. You can like move it down. I've had no issues personally, and I've like I think the longest I took was a 14-hour bus, you know, because like things are far. Like they are farther than Europe, so the time is a lot. But I would say there's still a good network, right? Like you can still, again, you can get to point A to whatever point, actually still relatively doable. It's just language and maybe a little bit of time. But other than that, it's actually doable. So I mean, I think it's the first two, to be honest, is stopping most Asian women going particularly. But if you can, again, you have to think, in my opinion, like back to tips for traveling, you have to think about the experience you're getting is not that experience, right? That you're going there to check out the culture and really understand how we look and live life. And I think, again, for me personally, that's why I moved here. I love how these people look at life. Like they don't have a lot of money, you know, like, but they're still happy. They're still enjoying life no matter what. They're still making you feel welcome. There's so many of my friends who like, Lauren, come over for my family stuff. And I'm like, okay. I went to like one of my friends' party in Brazil. He introduced me to his whole family, you know, and I'm like, I don't feel like that energy is as common anywhere else. And again, you can't put a price on that for me personally. So.
Yeah. Amazing. So, okay, then we'll just wrap up with maybe one word, maybe more than one word. But what is the one country you'd recommend to people if they haven't been to South America?
Go ahead, Jovi. You go first because I have so many thoughts.
I know it's probably really hard to narrow it down to just one.
I can't narrow. I'm going to give you three. I will give you three different contexts. There we go. So they have different reasons if you need to. But Jovi, I feel like you have one.
I'm still gonna go and pick one, and I think it's gonna be literally how I started, which is I think Peru was the perfect gateway, and I was gonna pick like a really like strong, runner up was going to be Brazil, but I think that the Portuguese is like it's such a big country that you kind of want to kind of ease yourself in first. Like in Brazil, I feel like you got to spend like at least a month to go through a bunch of stuff. But Peru is great. The infrastructure is there. There's going to be a lot of fantastic restaurants that you can go and just, I don't know, if you're really into food, if you're really into nature, if you just want to, if you love animals, I mean, like it's just kind of like it has it all. So that would be my recommendation. Is like I think like I've never heard someone come back from Peru and been like, I had a bad time,
Yeah, I'm sorry, there's just not three words for me, but I will say they're three words, not one word. So at least I didn't choose a country with two words in their name, okay? But I would say like I agree with Jovi. If you've never been to South America and you just want to dip your toe into it, I think again, it's the Thailand of South America is how I call it. There's so much infrastructure. The food's pretty decent. It's relatively safe at the places you're gonna go travel to. Like they're used to tourism. You know what I mean? Like it's like you're not gonna stand. In fact, you're not gonna stand out in a lot of ways. You know, you're not the first Asian to go to Cusco. Let's say that way. There's like other people, right? So in that sense, it's really comfortable. And I think Peru, specifically Lima, and like even parts of Cusco, because there's such touristy, there are those nice experience, right? Like you can go do like a very nice dinner at Lima, and they're not cheap actually. It's like it's like not that cheap as you would think. But a lot of good restaurants in Lima, they can have the fancy experience, and it's more affordable. But like it's still a nice experience. So you go to one country, I would have to say Lima. Now, that being said, I am also extremely biased and extremely like there's all good places, but I had to agree with Jovi, and I'm not gonna. These both countries are number two. I'm gonna put them I'm just gonna say Brazil first because Jovi said Brazil as well. I think Brazil is such a beautifully amazing country. But to that point, beyond just having time for it, I think Brazil's best experience if you know Brazilians. Like I have so many of my friends are people who've gone and like, oh, I went to Rio and Sao Paulo and like Salvador, which is in like Bahia, right? Like those are the main places. And yes, they're fun, and you're still gonna have that Brazilian energy. But for me, my favorite places in Brazil are all places that like only my Brazilian friends have recommended me, right? Like, and I'm definitely the only like Asian American there, or like one of 10, and there's so many good small towns there, but again, you need more time as one. And like number two, knowing locals helps a lot. So I think that with Brazil, it is amazingly beautiful, amazing culture. Love it there. I have so many friends, but it helps me know Brazilians. And the best way to know Brazilians is to get to meet them in other countries, actually, other South American countries. That's how I met most of my friends. And I was like, the other country that, and I know Joey knows which country I'm going to name. And as I said, I settled here for a reason, is Argentina. Love Argentina. I was going to say the other country, if you want a fancy experience in Asia, I'm not Asia, sorry, South America, right, is going to be Argentina. And the thing about Argentina, there's definitely nature. Like, again, we talk about Patagonia, and there's like in the north, like the Jujuy and Salta and everything, and like Iguazu Falls and all these beautiful places, right? But if you, let's say you're like, I don't have time, Lauren, like only 2 weeks. I mean, I just want to get a dip of like, like of Argentina. Honestly, Buenos Aires is one of the coolest cities I've been in. Like, Jovi, you agree, even though you're not gonna move here and visit me anytime soon, apparently. But
I'll
it's like,
visit you.
as you should. Like, good. Like, I promise. I'm taking that promise and keeping it right here. It's like they call it the Paris of South America, and it truly is. It is so beautiful here. There's so many nice restaurants. Like, it's one of the reasons I moved here. There's so many restaurants, like too many restaurants for me to try. It's relatively safe. It's easy to get around. There's beautiful parks. Lots of cultures. Argentines are extremely friendly with people. Like, Brazilians and Argentines, in my opinion, are the most friendly in South America. Different types of friendly, by the way, but Argentines are super friendly if you're foreign. They're like so excited you're here because it's really far, like they know it's not an easy place to go. So I also highly recommend Argentina. Like, again, especially you're like, I kind of want to try something fancy. The best steak restaurant in all the world is in Buenos Aires, y'all. So that's not motivation. And it's actually not that expensive. It's got a little bit more expensive recently, but it's not like cheaper than some restaurants in San Francisco. And I know some
Bring
of y'all
cash.
Francisco. Bring cash or Western Union. You can Western Union here, Joey. You can go Western Union yourself money now. Yeah, they have a really interesting economy, which whole other episode if you ever want to talk about that. But like, I can't decide what's like. I love all three so much. Well, actually, I love the two more, but for first timers, go to Peru. It's a good gateway drug.
We are aligned. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you both. I really, really appreciate it. I know we've only touched the tip of the iceberg. I actually feel like we could do a part two because we could get more in depth on so many other topics about South America. But I really, really appreciate you spending the time with me today. And I hope everyone listening and watching enjoyed and learned something today. And maybe you've left with the same way that I'm feeling, which is I can't wait to go to South America now. Like, I'm actually so excited. So, and I know exactly who to ask if I need tips and tricks. So I know where to go. And so you will know where to go too, because we're going to leave Lauren and Jovi's information for you and you can check out their podcast. And that wraps up November. So thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you so much, Justine. It's great being on here.
Thank you.